It was the 8th time in the last quarter cycle that the message had been sent. This was the part that infuriated Grand Admiral Kriox more than anything. For a race as small and insignificant as the humans, they had certainly developed an audacity beyond their worth. The message, always in the same calm tone, delivered in basic galactic standard, was nothing more than a simple warning. Stay away from Earth. Kriox's clawed hand gripped the armrest of his command throne, eyes narrowing at the hologram of the small blue planet floating before him. The species inhabiting it had no right to speak to the Galactic Empire with such nerve. This time, there would be no response. No half measures. Earth would fall, and in a matter of weeks, at that. The Council had convened a mere moon cycle ago, weighing the risks and resources, calculating the potential profit of annexing Earth. Their world was filled with natural treasures, untapped and abundant. Earth's oceans contained minerals worth more than entire star systems. Its mountains held precious metals that the Empire needed to fuel their wars and expansion efforts. And yet, every time they approached, those same humans would issue that same ridiculous warning, as if they had anything to back it up. "Captain Jorl," Kriox said, his voice cold, "prepare the invasion fleet." The air was damp and cool as Dorian Thorne leaned against the rusted hood of an old jeep, watching the gray horizon. A low rumble of distant thunder rolled in the distance, and the sharp tang of ozone filled the air. This was the calm before the storm, literally and figuratively. They'd come. The Imperians always came, regardless of the warnings. They couldn't help themselves. He adjusted his worn jacket, the one with frayed edges and patches of old military units, none of which he had actually served in. He wasn't a soldier. He never had been. He was just connected, in a way that most people couldn't understand. He felt Earth, and Earth felt him. "Dorian!" A shout echoed from the nearby bunker entrance, pulling him from his thoughts. Stepping from the shadows was Tomas, one of the few in their resistance group who had managed to survive the last few raids. Unlike Dorian, Tomas had served in actual combat, scars lining his arms and face, each telling a story of battles lost and won. "They've broken through the atmosphere," Tomas said, grimly. 5 battleships. At least. Dorian sighed, rubbing his temples. He had hoped the Empire would at least heed the warnings this time. Earth was not like the other worlds they had conquered. It wasn't about advanced military tech or endless supplies of soldiers. Earth had a protector, a force that ran deeper than any human could truly understand. He was just its messenger. "All right," Dorian said, pushing off the jeep. "Get everyone inside. It's starting." Kriox stood at the front of the bridge, arms clasped behind his back, staring at the shimmering blue planet as the battleships entered low orbit. Tactical holograms lit up across the deck as his officers relayed data. The entire fleet was ready. "Their defenses are laughable," one of his commanders said. "No orbital stations, no planetary shield. The humans haven't evolved beyond atmospheric fighters. This will be over in days." Kriox barely nodded. It was what he expected. Humanity was nothing if not primitive. They had advanced in pocket, sure, but they lacked the cohesion and understanding that the Empire had. It was a mistake for them to issue threats they couldn't back up. "Dispatch the first wave," Kriox ordered. The command was followed instantly by action. Across the fleet, shuttles loaded with elite Imperial soldiers launched toward the planet's surface. Each soldier was a trained warrior, wearing exosuits capable of withstanding the toughest conditions. They were prepared for a swift and decisive conquest. Dorian stood at the cliffside, his eyes following the streaks of fire in the sky as the Imperial dropships descended through the clouds. They never learned. The ground beneath him rumbled as the first of the ships touched down, Imperial forces disembarking in perfect formation. He knew what came next. They'd secure the area, move inward, and push toward population centers. They had been trained for this, to conquer, subdue, and crush any resistance. But they weren't ready for Earth. The sky darkened, thick clouds rolling in from the west. The low rumble of thunder grew louder, and the winds began to howl. To the untrained eye, it was just a storm. To Dorian, it was something else entirely. His connection to the planet pulsed, a rhythmic beat like a heart, growing stronger with each second. He closed his eyes and whispered under his breath. The words weren't his own. They were ancient, passed down from generation to generation, long before the first cities rose, long before humans understood their place in the universe. The earth stirred. Captain Vrax of the 1st Imperial Ground Squadron lifted his visor, scanning the horizon. They had landed in an open field, miles away from any major city. The mission was to establish a forward base and wait for further orders. Standard procedure for planetary invasions. "Squad, move out," Vrax ordered, signaling for his troops to fan out. His suit's sensors scanned for any hostiles. The humans were weak, but they were known for their guerrilla tactics. Still, the first landing zone was always the easiest. It was rare that any resistance could mount a defense so quickly. But something was wrong. The winds had picked up drastically, and the temperature dropped several degrees. His HUD flickered, struggling to maintain a steady readout. Around him, the sky seemed to churn, dark clouds swirling in unnatural patterns. Lightning crackled overhead, but not in the usual, chaotic fashion. It was deliberate, striking in calculated arcs, as if choosing its targets. "Sir, I'm getting some weird readings here," one of his soldiers said, their voice tinged with unease. Before Vrax could respond, the ground trembled. Not a normal tremor, but a violent shake that knocked several of his men off their feet. Trees swayed and groaned as if they were alive, the grass beneath them turning brittle and sharp. "Form up," Vrax barked, his voice strained as he activated his helmet's communication array. "Command, this is Squad Alpha. We have unusual." He never finished the sentence. A sudden bolt of lightning, brighter than any he had ever seen, struck the center of their formation. The force of it sent him sprawling backward, and when he opened his eyes, the ground was gone. The very earth had split open, swallowing half his squad into a chasm that hadn't been there moments before. This wasn't a planet, it was a trap. Back in the bunker, Tomas watched the chaos unfold through a series of hacked Imperial feeds. He turned to Dorian, who stood in silence, his eyes glazed over as if in a trance. "They never listen," Tomas muttered, shaking his head. Dorian didn't respond. His connection to the planet was deepening. Earth was awake now. The invaders had broken the natural harmony, and the planet's fury would not be contained. "They should have stayed away," Dorian whispered. And now, it was too late for them to turn back. Kriox slammed his fist onto the control panel, the sharp crack of his armor-plated knuckles ringing out through the command bridge. Around him, his officers scrambled to make sense of the chaos unfolding on the surface of Earth. The invasion was supposed to be simple. Conquer the planet, claim its resources, and put the humans in their place. But nothing was going according to plan. "Report," he barked, voice seething with barely controlled rage. "Grand Admiral," one of his lieutenants stammered, sweat beading on his brow. "The surface teams have encountered unforeseen resistance. Several platoons have lost contact. The weather systems appear to be—" "The weather?" Kriox's eyes blazed with fury. "I don't care about their storms. What of the humans? Have we secured any of their cities?" The lieutenant swallowed hard. We haven't even reached any population centers. The environment is hostile, sir, and we've detected unusual interference. Our tech isn't functioning as it should." Kriox leaned in, his massive frame casting a shadow over the trembling officer. "I want those soldiers back in formation. You send whatever reinforcements are necessary. Earth will fall." On the ground, Vrax staggered to his feet, his helmet's visor cracked from the blast. His squad was gone, half of them swallowed by the earth, the other half strewn about like ragdolls. He couldn't process it. None of this made sense. This wasn't war, it was madness. His suit's internal systems struggled to stabilize, glitching as the atmospheric readings fluctuated wildly. Oxygen levels spiked, then plummeted. Radiation from the storm above flickered in and out of detectability. The ground beneath him was changing. He saw the trees swaying, their branches creaking in an unnatural rhythm, almost like breathing. "Squad Alpha to command," he shouted into his comms. Static crackled in response. He activated the emergency beacon, but even that felt wrong. His exosuit's power supply, which should have lasted days, was already draining at an alarming rate. The suit was supposed to be impervious to external weather conditions, but something about Earth was overriding that. "Alpha to command," he yelled again, this time slamming a fist against his helmet in frustration. He heard nothing but static in return. Forcing himself to focus, Vrax scanned the horizon. There was nothing but trees, ominous in their stillness, and the darkening sky. His training told him to press forward, regroup, find higher ground, but something deep inside him whispered to run, to leave, to escape this cursed place. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. That feeling again, like something was watching him. Suddenly, the static in his helmet shifted. A voice came through, broken and distorted, but unmistakably human. "You should have listened." Vrax froze. His blood ran cold. The humans were tapping into their communications? No. This was something else. Something older, more powerful. And then he felt that the ground beneath his feet began to rumble again. But this time it wasn't an earthquake. It was something moving. Something enormous. He watched in stunned horror as the earth ahead of him cracked open, not with a natural fault line, but like a mouth opening, jagged rocks forming what looked disturbingly like teeth. Instinct kicked in. Vrax turned and ran, sprinting back toward the landing site. Behind him, the ground continued to split, swallowing trees and rock as it went, as if the planet itself was alive and hungry. His suit's power reserves continued to drain at an accelerating rate, warning lights flashing across his HUD. "Command, he tried again, but the comms were still useless. He could see the drop zone now. Several of the shuttles had been destroyed, crushed by falling debris or torn apart by the violent winds. A few soldiers were still alive, though. He spotted them huddled near the wreckage, trying to repair a damaged shuttle. "Get to the shuttle," Vrax yelled, his voice hoarse as he reached the others. "We need to get off this planet now." One of the soldiers, an engineer named Garlon, looked up at him, face pale beneath his helmet. "Sir, the engines aren't responding. Everything's fried. We were stuck here." Vrax's heart sank. "What about the fleet?" Garland shook his head. "No contact." Vrax cursed under his breath. He looked back at the horizon, where the cracks in the earth had begun to spread like a web, tearing apart the landscape. "We can't stay here. We need to." His words were cut off by a deafening roar, not from the sky, but from beneath their feet. The ground buckled again, more violently this time, and something massive began to rise from the depths. "What the hell is that?" Garland whispered, backing away in terror. Vrax didn't have an answer. All he knew was that it wasn't natural. Nothing about this planet was. The humans had warned them, but the Empire hadn't listened. Now they were paying the price. Deep in the bunker, Dorian's connection to the planet was stronger than ever. His pulse synced with the rhythmic beat of the earth, his mind flooded with visions of the invaders' panic and confusion. They had underestimated Earth, just as he had known they would. But even he hadn't expected the planet to respond with such ferocity. Tomas stood beside him, watching the feeds with a mixture of awe and fear. Is this what you wanted, Dorian? Is this what Earth wanted?" Dorian didn't answer immediately. His eyes were distant, his breathing steady and slow. "It's not about what I want," he said finally, his voice calm. "It's about balance. They came here with the intention to take, to destroy. Earth is just defending itself." Tomas nodded, but he still looked uneasy. "And what about us? What happens if Earth decides we're part of the problem?" Dorian glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "We're not invaders, Tomas. We're the caretakers. Earth knows that." But even as he spoke, Dorian could feel the planet's energy shifting, becoming more erratic, more dangerous. It was as if the invaders had awakened something primal, something that had been dormant for centuries, waiting for a threat big enough to stir it from its slumber. "We need to keep moving," Dorian said, his voice taking on a new urgency. "Earth's not done yet, and neither are they." Kriox watched the footage from the surface with disbelief. The Empire's most elite soldiers, outfitted with the best technology in the galaxy, were being overrun not by human forces, but by the planet itself. His commanders had tried to explain it scientifically: atmospheric anomalies, tectonic shifts, electromagnetic interference. But Kriox knew better. This was no natural phenomenon. This was something else. "Admiral," one of his officers said cautiously, Should we retreat?" Kriox's eyes snapped toward the officer, burning with rage. "Retreat? From a primitive planet like this? Never. We will find a way to neutralize whatever this is." "But sir, our ground teams are—" "I don't care about the ground teams," Kriox snarled. "Send the Thrigians. Have them deploy the resonance disruptors. We'll tear this planet apart if we have to." The officer hesitated, but a sharp glare from Kriox silenced any further protest. "Yes, Admiral. I'll relay the orders." As the officer scurried away, Kriox turned back to the planet, his mind racing. He had never encountered a world like this before, one that seemed to fight back. But he would not be bested by a backwater species and their rogue planet. He would find a way to break Earth or die trying. Dorian felt the shift in the air, the heavy weight of the planet's fury hanging like a storm cloud. The invaders weren't giving up. They were about to escalate, and Earth was ready to meet them head-on. "They're going to make another move," Dorian said, his voice grim. "Something big." Tomos nodded, loading his weapon. "Then we better be ready." Dorian smiled faintly. "Oh, we will be, but it's not us they should be worried about." High above, the storm clouds began to gather, darker and more ominous than ever. And from deep within the Earth, something ancient stirred. The skies over Earth turned black, thick with swirling clouds and flashes of lightning that seemed to crack open the very heavens. In orbit, Kriox watched as the planet's atmosphere roiled with energy, more volatile than anything the Empire had ever encountered. His command bridge was tense, the air buzzing with nervous anticipation. "Admiral, we're receiving reports from the surface teams," one of his senior officers reported. "The Thrigians have deployed the resonance disruptors." Kriox's eyes narrowed as he watched the live feed on the holo display. The Thrigians were a brutal warrior species, taller and stronger than humans, with technology specifically designed for planetary conquest. They were the Empire's secret weapon for breaking worlds. "We'll see how this primitive planet responds to them," Kriox muttered under his breath. He was tired of delays, tired of unexplained phenomena. Earth would fall, just like every other planet before it. He shifted his attention to the holo map of Earth. Glowing red marks showed where the disruptors had been deployed. Each disruptor sent waves of energy into the planet's core, designed to destabilize the environment, weaken tectonic plates, and disrupt magnetic fields. If Earth was fighting back, the disruptors would tear it apart from within. Kriox smiled grimly. "Let's see them resist that." On the ground, Vrax was still running, heart pounding in his chest as the landscape buckled and shifted around him. His suit systems were malfunctioning again, the energy readings completely out of control. The very air felt heavy, charged with electricity, and something else, something darker, older. He reached the ruins of what had once been a human settlement. The buildings were abandoned, their windows shattered, and the streets cracked open by the quakes. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying with it a sense of dread that made his skin crawl. He spotted the Thrigians up ahead, their hulking forms moving methodically through the rubble. They had already deployed 2 of the resonance disruptors, their massive machines pulsing with energy that made the ground tremble even more. The Thrigians didn't care. They were used to conquering worlds with brute force. Vrax watched from the shadows, unsure of what to do. He couldn't trust his tech anymore. His comms were dead, his weapons targeting system was glitching, and the planet itself seemed determined to kill them all. But the Thrigians were still moving forward, unstoppable as ever. Then, as if in response to the disruptors, the ground began to shake again, more violently than before. But this time, it wasn't the natural quakes or the shifts he'd seen earlier. This time, it felt intentional. Vrax's eyes widened as he saw something rise from the earth, a massive formation of stone and rock, almost like a pillar but twisted, jagged. It shot up into the sky, right where one of the resonance disruptors was stationed. The Thrigians barely had time to react before the structure came crashing down, smashing the disruptor to pieces and sending the soldiers flying. The ground groaned, and more of the strange formations began to emerge, all targeting the disruptors. Vrax watched in stunned silence as the planet seemed to fight back, not just passively, but actively seeking out the Empire's technology and destroying it. The Thrigians regrouped, roaring in frustration, but it was no use. Every time they deployed another disruptor, the Earth responded with even more fury. Pillars of rock, bursts of energy from the ground, violent storms that seemed to form out of nowhere. And then, Vrax saw it. In the distance, near the horizon, something enormous was rising. It was hard to make out through the haze of dust and storm clouds, but it was massive, far larger than anything he'd ever seen. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't even natural. It was something else. Something alive. Vrax's heart pounded in his chest. He had to get out of here. He had to warn command. But even as he turned to run, the ground shifted again, and he was thrown to the ground by the force of another quake. This planet wasn't just defending itself. It was retaliating. Admiral Kriox, the resonance disruptors have been destroyed. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Kriox's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the control panel. "What do you mean destroyed?" he snarled. "The Thrigians were overrun. The planet it's fighting back, sir. Actively. Every time we deploy a disruptor, it's destroyed within minutes." Kriox slammed his fist into the panel, the holomap flickering as his temper flared. "Impossible. This is a backwater planet. They don't have the technology for this." "It's not their technology, sir," the officer said quietly. "It's the planet itself. It's reacting." Kriox's eyes burned with fury. He'd never seen anything like this. Planets didn't just defend themselves. That was a myth, a legend told by ancient civilizations. But here it was, unfolding in real time. "We need to retreat," the officer said, voice shaking, "before it's too late." Kriox glared at him. "Retreat? We've already committed too many resources to this. I will not go back to the Empire with nothing to show for it." "But sir..." Kriox silenced him with a wave of his hand. "Send in the Black Suns." The officer hesitated, eyes wide. "The Black Suns? But they're the only ones capable of dealing with this. Deploy them now." The Black Suns were the Empire's most feared soldiers, mercenaries who operated outside of standard military protocols. They specialized in impossible missions, and they had no qualms about using any means necessary to achieve their objectives. If anyone could break Earth, it was them. Dorian felt the tremors before they even reached the bunker. Earth's fury was growing, but so was the threat from above. The invaders weren't giving up. They were escalating. "They're sending more troops," Tomas said, watching the feeds with concern. "Heavier ones this time." Dorian nodded. He could feel it in the air, the weight of something more dangerous, more destructive, approaching. "They think they can break Earth," Dorian said quietly. "But they don't understand what they've unleashed." Tomas glanced at him, frowning. "What do you mean?" Dorian's eyes flickered with something ancient, something that had been dormant for a long time. "Earth isn't just a planet. It's alive, and it's angry." Before Tomas could respond, the ground shook violently, and the feed on the screen flickered with static. Dorian's connection to the planet surged, overwhelming his senses. He gasped, eyes wide, as visions flooded his mind not just of the invaders, but of something deeper, something older. The Black Suns had landed, and they were about to learn the hard way that Earth was not just a battlefield. It was a living, breathing entity, and it had had enough. Vrax's legs moved of their own accord as he scrambled over the uneven terrain. The sound of explosions and the howling wind filled his ears. Rocks and debris flew through the air, making it hard to see, hard to breathe. He'd been caught in battles before more than most soldiers his rank, but nothing like this. This wasn't a battle. This was a reckoning. He ducked into the ruins of what had once been a human stronghold, its walls crumbling but still offering some shelter from the chaos outside. Inside, it was eerily quiet. The oppressive atmosphere weighed on him, making the air feel thick, almost unbreathable. Vrax knelt behind a half-collapsed pillar, catching his breath and trying to make sense of what was happening. His comms were still dead, his weapon barely functional, and the planet, this cursed, unforgiving planet, was reacting like a living creature under siege. A soft rumble echoed from deep within the earth. He could feel it vibrating through the ground, through his very bones. It wasn't natural, but it wasn't mechanical either. It was something else. Suddenly, a shadow loomed over him. Vrax whipped around, raising his weapon reflexively, though he knew it wouldn't do much good. His finger hovered over the trigger, but he froze when he saw what stood before him. A figure. Human. The man was tall, lean but muscular, with short-cropped dark hair and intense eyes that seemed to glow with an inner fire. He wore battered armor that looked ancient and well-worn, as if it had seen 1,000 battles. Despite the chaos outside, the man stood calm and resolute, as if the storm was a mere inconvenience. Vrax blinked, unsure if he was seeing things. How could any human survive out here, in the middle of this destruction? But the man wasn't just surviving. He was standing tall, unshaken by the upheaval around him. "You're not supposed to be here," the human said, his voice steady but carrying a weight of authority that Vrax had only ever heard from the highest-ranking Imperial officers. It wasn't a threat, it was a fact. Vrax swallowed hard. I'm with the Empire," he stammered, though he knew the words meant little now. The man nodded slowly, as if Vrax had just confirmed something he already knew. "And the Empire doesn't listen." Before Vrax could respond, the ground shook again, more violently this time. Outside, a massive stone pillar rose from the ground, slamming into the remains of one of the Thrigian dropships. The ship exploded in a shower of metal and fire, but the human didn't flinch. "They think they can conquer this world," the man continued, stepping closer. "But Earth isn't just a planet, it's more than that, and it's tired of being underestimated." Vrax felt a cold sweat trickle down his spine. He had heard the stories, of course rumors and legends passed around by soldiers on long deployments. They said that some worlds were different, that some planets had a will of their own. But those were just myths, weren't they? "What is this?" Vrax whispered, almost to himself. The human's eyes flickered with something ancient, something almost beyond comprehension. "Earth is waking up. It's been dormant for a long time, allowing you and your empire to take what you wanted. But now you've gone too far." Vrax didn't understand. None of this made sense. The Empire had conquered countless worlds, subjugated entire species. Why was Earth different? Why now? The human must have seen the confusion in Vrax's eyes, because he shook his head slightly. "You'll see soon enough." Before Vrax could ask what he meant, a deafening roar echoed from the distance. The sound was unlike anything he had ever heard, deep and guttural, like the cry of a wounded beast. The ground quaked in response, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. The human turned, his gaze focused on the horizon. "They're here." Vrax followed his line of sight, and his blood ran cold. The Black Suns. They were moving through the ruins with terrifying efficiency, their dark armor gleaming in the flickering light of the fires. The Black Suns were more than just soldiers, they were legends in their own right. Elite, ruthless, and utterly without mercy, they were the Empire's last resort. Where ordinary forces failed, the Black Suns succeeded. And now they were coming for Earth. "They won't stop," Vrax muttered, half to himself. The human nodded grimly. No, they won't. But they won't win either. Vrax wanted to argue, to say that the Black Suns were unstoppable. But as he watched the planet itself rise up against the invaders, as he felt the raw power coursing through the ground beneath him, he wasn't so sure anymore. They think they can break Earth, the human said softly. But Earth is older than they know, and it has allies. Vrax turned to him, eyes wide. What allies? The human met his gaze, and for a moment, Vrax thought he saw something flicker in those ancient eyes. Something, not human. You'll see. Before Vrax could ask more, the ground erupted in a massive explosion of rock and energy, throwing him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, his vision swimming as the world around him descended into chaos. The Black Suns had arrived in full force, their heavy artillery lighting up the sky. But even as their weapons fired, the planet fought back. Massive stone formations rose from the ground, blocking their advance, while bolts of lightning struck with pinpoint accuracy, destroying their equipment. Vrax struggled to his feet, his mind racing. This wasn't a battle anymore. This was a war between Earth and the Empire was losing. The human was gone, vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared. But his words lingered in Vrax's mind. Earth wasn't just a planet, it was something more. And it was angry. Vrax stumbled through the chaos, the thunderous roar of the Black Sun's artillery ringing in his ears. His vision blurred as another tremor rocked the ground beneath him. The world around him had become a living nightmare. Smoke filled the sky. Lightning carved jagged lines across the horizon, and the very earth beneath his feet seemed to rebel against his every step. He had seen war before, but nothing like this. This wasn't just a battle for territory. It was as if the planet itself was alive, rising in fury against those who dared tread upon its surface. Vrax finally found cover behind a jagged outcropping of rock, breathing heavily as he glanced at the advancing Black Suns. They moved with precision, their black armor gleaming despite the swirling dust and debris. They were relentless, cutting through the ruins of the human stronghold with ease, their advanced weaponry reducing everything in their path to rubble. And yet, for every inch they gained, the planet struck back. Massive fissures opened beneath their feet, swallowing entire squads whole. Trees twisted and gnarled as if shaped by the planet's anger rose from the ground, their roots tearing through armor and machinery alike. Lightning strikes, unnervingly precise, shattered their lines, sending even the elite soldiers of the Empire into disarray. Vrax wasn't sure what scared him more, the unyielding power of Earth or the human who had stood in its midst, seemingly unaffected by the chaos. His thoughts were interrupted by the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps. He pressed himself against the rock, holding his breath as a group of Black Suns marched past, their boots crunching against the shattered remnants of what had once been a road. They moved with deadly purpose, their dark visors scanning the surroundings for any sign of resistance. Vrax clenched his jaw. If the Black Suns found him, he was as good as dead. His weapon was useless, and he was far too close to their advance to make a run for it. He had no choice but to wait, to hope that they passed by without noticing him. But luck, it seemed, was not on his side. One of the soldiers, a towering figure with a sleek, black helmet, paused mid-step. His visor locked onto Vrax's hiding spot, and for a heart-stopping moment there was silence. Then, without a word, the soldier raised his rifle, the weapon's energy core glowing ominously. Vrax's heart raced. He was unarmed, defenseless. He had nowhere to run. But just as the soldier's finger tightened on the trigger, the ground beneath them trembled violently. A low, guttural rumble echoed through the air, and the Black Suns immediately shifted their focus, their formation tightening as they prepared for the next wave of attacks from the planet. Vrax seized the moment, slipping deeper into the ruins, moving silently as the ground shook and the Black Suns braced for impact. He could hear their commanding officer barking orders through the chaos, but even their legendary discipline couldn't protect them from what came next. The ground erupted. Massive stone pillars shot up from the earth, crashing through the advancing soldiers like they were nothing more than insects. The air filled with dust and debris as the Black Suns were thrown into disarray, their carefully crafted battle formation shattered in an instant. Vrax didn't stop to watch. He ran, moving as fast as his legs would carry him through the twisting ruins. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't just some natural phenomenon. It was targeted, calculated. The planet was fighting back, and it was doing so with terrifying precision. But how? How could a planet, an inanimate object, be capable of such a thing? The words of the human echoed in his mind. Earth wasn't just a planet. It was something more. But what did that mean? Vrax's thoughts were cut short as he stumbled into a clearing. The ruins here were less dense, and for a moment, the chaos of battle seemed distant. He slowed his pace, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he surveyed his surroundings. That's when he saw it. A figure tall, imposing stood at the center of the clearing. Unlike the human he had encountered before, this one was clad in strange armor that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. The figure was watching him, but there was no hostility in its stance. Instead, it seemed almost curious. Vrax hesitated. Something about the figure felt off, like it didn't belong here. It wasn't a Black Sun, nor was it human. But what was it? Before he could move, the figure spoke. "You've seen it, haven't you?" The voice was deep, resonant, and it sent a chill down Vrax's spine. He couldn't tell if the speaker was male or female, human or alien. There was an otherworldly quality to it, something ancient and unknowable. I don't know what you mean," Vrax stammered, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm, even though he knew it was useless. The figure took a step forward, its armor shifting with an almost liquid grace. "Earth. You've felt its power. You've seen what it's capable of." Vrax swallowed hard. "What is this? What's happening?" The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering the question. "You are part of something much larger than you realize, Imperial. Earth has been dormant for a long time, but now it awakens. The Empire's arrival has stirred something deep within it." Vrax shook his head, his mind reeling. "This planet, it's alive." The figure chuckled, a sound that was both unsettling and oddly comforting. "In a manner of speaking, Earth is not like the other worlds your empire has conquered. It has a will of its own, a consciousness that you cannot comprehend." Vrax felt a shiver run down his spine. This was madness. Planets didn't think, they didn't feel. They were just rocks, floating in the void. But then, what was he seeing? What was he experiencing? The figure took another step forward, its gaze locking onto Vrax's. "You're beginning to understand, aren't you? Earth is more than just a world. It is a force. And now it fights back." Vrax didn't know what to say. His entire worldview was crumbling around him. The Empire had always been the ultimate power in the galaxy, but now it seemed small, insignificant compared to the raw, untamed fury of this planet. "Why are you telling me this?" Vrax asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure smiled, though it was hard to tell if the expression was friendly or menacing. "Because you have a choice, Imperial. You can return to your empire, tell them what you've seen, what you've learned, or you can stay and witness the true power of Earth." Vrax hesitated. He didn't know what to do, what to believe. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same. Vrax had barely taken in the figure's cryptic words before the ground beneath him trembled once more. It was subtle at first, just a slight vibration, but it quickly escalated into something far more violent. The earth groaned, as if some ancient beast was stirring beneath its surface, and Vrax had to steady himself to avoid being thrown to the ground. The figure remained motionless, its strange armor glimmering in the dim light. Whatever was happening, it didn't seem to affect the stranger. Vrax's mind raced as he tried to process the bizarre encounter, but there was no time to think. The tremors intensified, and the sound of the planet's fury filled the air once again. Without warning, the ground directly in front of Vrax erupted, sending chunks of earth and stone flying into the air. He stumbled backward, shielding his face from the debris. But when he looked again, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A massive fissure had opened in the earth, stretching as far as he could see in either direction. From within the depths of the fissure, a strange, pulsating light emanated, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. It was as if the planet itself had split open, revealing something ancient and terrifying beneath its surface. Vrax's heart raced as he stared into the abyss. He didn't know what to do, didn't know if there was anything he could do. The figure's words echoed in his mind. Earth is more than just a world. It is a force. He took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to run. But before he could move any further, the ground around him began to shift once more. The air was filled with an unnatural, almost electric tension, and Vrax could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. At first, he thought it was another tremor, another fissure opening up. But as he turned to look, he realized it was something far worse. Emerging from the ground, like shadows given form, were figures twisted, nightmarish creatures that seemed to be made of the very earth itself. Their bodies were a grotesque blend of stone and soil, their jagged forms crackling with the same strange energy that emanated from the fissure. Vrax's breath caught in his throat. He had faced many enemies in his time, but these were something else entirely. They were primal, elemental, and there was no doubt in his mind that they were connected to whatever force was driving Earth's rebellion. The creatures moved with unsettling grace, their stone limbs grinding together as they advanced. Vrax took another step back, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan. He had no weapons that could deal with something like this. His blaster was useless, and even if he managed to evade them, there was no guarantee that he could outrun whatever forces the planet had unleashed. Suddenly, the figure spoke again, its voice calm and almost serene amidst the chaos. They are the planet's guardians. It has called upon them to protect itself. Vrax tore his gaze away from the advancing creatures, his eyes locking onto the figure. Protect itself? From what? The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it turned its gaze toward the fissure, watching as the light within it grew brighter, more intense. From the Empire, it said at last. From those who seek to claim what they do not understand. Vrax's mind reeled. Was this what the humans had been trying to warn them about? The Empire had assumed that Earth was just another world to conquer, another resource to exploit. But now, it was clear that they had made a grave mistake. The planet wasn't just a resource, it was alive, and it was fighting back. The creatures were getting closer now, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground as they advanced. Vrax's pulse quickened, and he glanced around, searching for an escape route. There was no way he could take them on directly, but maybe, just maybe, he could use the chaos to his advantage. "Why are you helping me?" Vrax asked, his voice laced with suspicion. He still didn't trust the figure, didn't understand its motives. Was it human? Alien? Something else entirely? The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, as if considering the question. "Because you are not like the others," it said finally. "You have seen the truth, and you are still standing. Most would have run by now or died." Vrax clenched his fists. He wasn't sure if that was meant to be a compliment or a warning, but it didn't matter. He had to focus on surviving, on getting out of this nightmare alive. "I can't fight those things," Vrax muttered, more to himself than to the figure. His mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. The creatures were nearly upon him now, their stone limbs creaking and groaning as they closed in. He could feel the heat radiating off them, the raw, elemental power that coursed through their bodies. Then, to his surprise, the figure stepped forward, placing itself between Vrax and the advancing creatures. "You don't need to fight them," it said calmly. "Not yet." Before Vrax could respond, the figure raised its hand, and the air around them seemed to shift. There was a strange, almost tangible energy in the air, and Vrax felt the ground beneath him begin to tremble once more. But this time, it wasn't violent or destructive. It was controlled, deliberate. The creatures stopped in their tracks. Vrax stared in disbelief as the stone guardians, these towering, unstoppable forces of nature, came to a halt, their glowing eyes fixed on the figure before them. They didn't move, didn't attack. They simply stood there, waiting. "What? What are you doing?" Vrax asked, his voice barely a whisper. The figure turned to him, its expression unreadable. "I'm giving you a chance," it said simply, "to leave, to survive." Vrax hesitated. He didn't understand what was happening, didn't know why the figure had spared him. But he wasn't about to question his luck. Without another word, he turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest as he fled the scene. He didn't look back, didn't stop to question the strange events that had unfolded. All he knew was that he had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. As he disappeared into the ruins, the figure watched him go, its gaze thoughtful. The stone creatures remained still, their silent vigil unbroken. And then, slowly, the figure turned its attention back to the fissure, where the pulsating light continued to grow stronger, more intense. "Soon," it whispered. "Soon, the true battle will begin." The adrenaline from Vrax's escape was still coursing through his veins as he sprinted through the ruins. The weight of what he had witnessed pressed down on him. He had been a part of countless missions, many far more dangerous than this. But there was something different about Earth. It wasn't just the planet's defenses or the strange figure that had spared him. It was the feeling that everything he thought he knew had been wrong. The Empire had made a mistake that could cost them dearly. But that wasn't Vrax's problem anymore. He had escaped, at least, for now. The crumbling ruins stretched out before him, a maze of jagged stone and forgotten architecture that seemed to go on forever. His boots crunched against the debris as he ran, every step echoing in the eerie silence. The once mighty structures, long eroded by time, loomed overhead like skeletal remains of some ancient civilization. His comms device crackled to life, startling him. "Vrax, report." It was the voice of his commanding officer, Kellen. He sounded impatient, as always. Vrax slowed his pace, glancing over his shoulder to make sure he wasn't being followed. The stone creatures were nowhere in sight, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were still watching him. I'm here," Vrax responded, catching his breath. "You need to call off the invasion. Now." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, followed by a scoff. "What are you talking about, Vrax? The fleet's already moving into position. The ground teams will be deployed within the hour. Your mission was reconnaissance, not—" "I'm telling you, call it off," Vrax interrupted, his voice rising. He could still feel the tremors in the ground, could still see the fissure and the glowing light in his mind. "The planet isn't what we thought it was. It's alive. Somehow, it's defending itself." Kellen's voice was laced with skepticism. "You've been planetside for too long. Earth is nothing more than a primitive rock with a few outdated defenses. We'll crush it in a matter of—" "You're wrong," Vrax growled, anger bubbling up inside him. "You don't understand. It's not just the planet, it's something bigger. There are forces here we can't control, things we didn't account for. If you send more troops, they'll be walking into a slaughter." Kellen sighed, clearly losing patience. "Listen, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this is an Imperial order. The invasion will proceed as planned. If you're too shaken to complete your mission, we'll extract you. But we're not abandoning the operation based on some wild theory about—" Another tremor shook the ground, this one far stronger than the last. Vrax stumbled, nearly losing his footing as the ruins around him groaned in protest. He swore under his breath, glancing up at the darkened sky. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like the planet itself was growing angrier by the second. "I don't care what orders you've got," Vrax spat into the comms. "If you send them, they're dead. All of them. And it'll be on you." With that, he cut the transmission, his mind racing. He couldn't convince them, he knew that now. The Empire wouldn't listen until it was too late, until they had already sent their soldiers to die. The figure's warning echoed in his mind. Earth is more than just a world. It is a force. What the hell did that mean? And why had the figure spared him? There was no time for answers now. Vrax needed to get off the planet, needed to find a way back to the fleet before the situation got even worse. He glanced down at his wrist, activating the beacon that would signal for an extraction team. If they were smart, they'd get him out of here before things went completely sideways. But as the seconds ticked by, he heard nothing. No reply, no acknowledgement of his signal, just the eerie silence of the ruins. "Damn it," Vrax muttered, his heart sinking. He was on his own. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the ruins, carrying with it the faint sound of distant voices. Vrax froze, his hand instinctively moving to the blaster at his side. The wind picked up, swirling the dust and debris around him, and for a moment it felt as if the very air itself was alive with tension. Then he saw them. At first, they were little more than silhouettes, moving through the haze of dust and rubble. But as they drew closer, Vrax's stomach twisted in fear. These weren't human soldiers, they weren't even alive. The figures that emerged from the shadows were like specters' humanoid shapes, their bodies made of crackling energy and earth. Their faces were featureless, their limbs elongated and jagged, as if they had been carved from the very rock beneath them. And yet, they moved with a terrifying grace, their steps deliberate, unhurried. Vrax's hand tightened around his blaster. He knew it was useless. He had seen how the planet's guardians had shrugged off everything the Empire had thrown at them, but he wasn't about to go down without a fight. The creatures approached, their glowing eyes fixed on him. Vrax raised his weapon, his heart pounding in his chest. He had faced death before, but never like this. Never against something so unnatural. One of the creatures stopped just a few meters away from him, its head tilting slightly, as if studying him. Vrax's finger hovered over the trigger, his mind racing. And then, to his astonishment, the creature spoke. "You are not like the others," it said, its voice a deep, resonant echo. "You have been spared. You will not be harmed." Vrax blinked, taken aback. The creature's words were almost identical to what the figure had told him. Was this another warning? Another chance to leave? "What do you want?" Vrax demanded, his voice shaking slightly. The creature didn't answer right away. Instead, it turned its gaze toward the distant horizon, where the first hints of the Empire's fleet could be seen in the sky, dark, imposing ships, descending toward the planet like vultures. "The Empire will fall," the creature said simply. "Earth will not allow its destruction. You must leave." Vrax gritted his teeth, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He had tried to warn them, had tried to stop the invasion. But now, there was nothing he could do. The fleet was coming, and there was no turning back. I can't leave," Vrax said quietly, lowering his blaster. "Not yet." The creature's glowing eyes shifted back to him, and for a moment, Vrax thought he saw something almost human flicker in its gaze. "Then you will witness the end." Without another word, the creatures turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving Vrax alone once more. The wind died down, the tremors subsided, and the ruins fell silent. But Vrax knew that silence wouldn't last. The storm was coming. Vrax stood amidst the ruins, the weight of the creature's words hanging heavily in the air. "You will witness the end." He shivered at the thought. The Empire was approaching, and if the Guardians were correct, they were heading into a trap. Vrax couldn't shake the feeling that he had just been given a glimpse of the chaos that awaited them. He turned back toward the horizon, where the Empire's fleet descended like a storm, dark and menacing against the pale sky. The ships, with their sleek designs and advanced weaponry, represented everything he had once believed in: power, control, and the unwavering strength of the Empire. But now they felt more like a harbinger of doom than a force of order. "Vrax, do you read?" Kellen's voice crackled through the comms, breaking his reverie. "We're landing in 10 minutes. Report your position." Vrax took a deep breath, steadying his thoughts. He needed to warn them, to make them understand that what lay ahead was not just another conquest. "I'm near the landing zone," he replied, forcing the words through clenched teeth. "You need to pull back. The planet is defending itself." "Enough with the excuses," Kellen barked. "We're moving forward. Prepare for landing and rendezvous with the team. We're going to crush any resistance we encounter." "Don't you get it?" Vrax shouted, frustration boiling over. "You're walking into a death trap. This isn't just a simple extraction, it's a war zone." There was a pause, and for a moment, Vrax thought he had finally gotten through to his commanding officer. But then Kellen replied with a cool detachment that made Vrax's blood run cold. "You're getting too emotional, Vrax. Focus on the mission." The comms fell silent, and Vrax felt a surge of helplessness wash over him. He knew he was fighting a losing battle. He had already seen the fate of those who underestimated Earth's power. The Guardians were not mere sentinels, they were manifestations of the planet's will. The Empire's advance was bound to awaken their fury. Suddenly, the ground shook again, but this time it felt different, more controlled. Vrax glanced around, watching as the Earth began to swell, the fissure pulsing with that strange light he had seen earlier. A deep rumble filled the air, and Vrax realized the Guardians were reacting to the approaching ships. He needed to find shelter. The last thing he wanted was to be caught in the crossfire between the Empire and whatever force the planet had summoned to defend itself. As he sprinted through the ruins, he glanced back over his shoulder. The Imperial ships were coming closer now, their thrusters roaring as they descended. A part of him wanted to turn around and warn them, but he knew it would be pointless. The Empire would never listen. Reaching a nearby structure that still stood somewhat intact, Vrax ducked inside, peering through a cracked window to get a better view of the landing zone. The ships landed with a thundering crash, their landing gear sinking into the earth. Troops began to pour out, clad in armor that gleamed menacingly even in the fading light. Vrax's heart raced as he watched them assemble, weapons at the ready. The soldiers were confident, their faces set with determination, oblivious to the imminent danger they faced. They had come here believing they were on the brink of victory, but Vrax knew better. They were stepping into a nightmare. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light erupted from the fissure. Vrax squinted against the brightness, watching as the Guardians emerged once more, their bodies thrumming with energy. They moved with a fluid grace, a stark contrast to the armored soldiers who were now gathering their ranks. The first shot rang out a laser bolt from an Imperial blaster, aimed at the nearest Guardian. The bolt hit the creature square in the chest, and for a fleeting moment, Vrax thought he had been wrong, that maybe the Empire could fight back. But then, the Guardian simply absorbed the energy, its form glowing even brighter. It retaliated with a wave of its arm, and a shockwave rippled through the air, sending the soldiers sprawling. Vrax watched in horror as chaos erupted. The troops fired blindly into the air, their disciplined formations breaking apart as the Guardians closed in. Vrax clenched his jaw, torn between the instinct to flee and the urge to help. The Guardians were terrifying, yes, but they were also a reflection of the planet's fury that had been provoked by the Empire's arrogance. He had to act. Taking a deep breath, Vrax stepped out from the ruins, hands raised to signal his intentions. "Stop! We need to retreat," he shouted, hoping against hope that someone would hear him over the din of battle. But the soldiers were too caught up in the chaos to listen. They fired shot after shot, the air crackling with energy. Vrax could see their fear now, the uncertainty creeping into their movements as they faced the Guardians' onslaught. One soldier stumbled too close to a Guardian, and with a swift motion, the creature lashed out, its stone-like arm striking the soldier with unimaginable force. The man was thrown several feet, hitting the ground with a sickening thud. "Stop firing," Vrax yelled again, desperation creeping into his voice. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." But it was no use. The Empire had always underestimated the potential of any planet they encountered, and Earth was no exception. He needed to find a way to make them see the truth before it was too late. "Vrax," Kellen's voice cut through the chaos, and Vrax turned to see his commanding officer emerging from the chaos, flanked by a group of soldiers. "What are you doing? Get back." "No," Vrax shouted, his frustration boiling over. "You need to understand, the planet is fighting back." Kellen's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Another shockwave erupted from the fissure, and Vrax barely had time to brace himself. The force knocked him off his feet, sending him sprawling to the ground. He struggled to regain his footing, gasping for breath as he pushed himself back up. The Guardians were moving with renewed vigor, and Vrax could see more of them emerging from the fissure, drawn to the chaos like moths to a flame. As he regained his footing, he glanced at Kellen and the other soldiers. Panic was spreading through their ranks now, and Vrax knew they needed to regroup fast. "Fall back," Vrax yelled, waving his arms in a futile attempt to rally the troops. "We can't fight them. We need to get to higher ground." But it was too late. The Guardians surged forward, and in that moment, Vrax realized they had awakened a force far beyond anything the Empire could comprehend. The ground was shaking, the air crackling with energy, and the soldiers were panicking. In the distance, he could see more Guardians rising from the earth, their glowing forms illuminating the battlefield. They were not just defending the planet. They were here to make a statement. Vrax turned back to Kellen, desperation etched across his face. "Please, we need to leave now. This isn't a battle we can win." Kellen's jaw tightened as he watched the chaos unfold. For a moment, Vrax thought he saw uncertainty flicker in his commanding officer's eyes, but it was quickly masked by his stubborn resolve. "Regroup," Kellen shouted to the remaining troops. "We can't abandon our position. We hold the line." Vrax felt a wave of despair wash over him. The Empire's stubbornness would lead to their downfall, and he was powerless to stop it. The first wave of Guardians crashed into the soldiers, their stone limbs moving with deadly precision. Vrax watched as soldiers fell one after another, unable to withstand the onslaught. The once proud Imperial forces were being dismantled before his eyes, and he felt a sense of helplessness creeping in. "Vrax," Kellen shouted, barely audible over the chaos. "Get out of here. Find a way to signal for extraction." Before Vrax could respond, another shockwave pulsed from the fissure, and he was thrown off his feet again. Dust filled the air, obscuring his vision as he struggled to regain his bearings. He crawled to a nearby outcropping, using it as cover as the Guardians continued their relentless assault. He could hear the cries of the soldiers, the sound of blaster fire mixed with the groans of the Guardians. Panic surged within him, and he knew that if he didn't act fast, he would be next. He reached for his comms device, desperately trying to establish a connection. "This is Vrax. We need immediate extraction. The Empire is under attack. Repeat." The device crackled, then went silent. The signal was lost amidst the chaos, and Vrax slammed it against the ground in frustration. Then he caught a glimpse of something in the distance, the figure he had encountered earlier, standing amidst the chaos as if untouched by the destruction around it. It was watching, waiting. A surge of determination flooded through him. Vrax wouldn't abandon his fellow soldiers, not when there was still a chance to turn the tide. He had to find that figure to understand what it knew. Gathering his resolve, Vrax pushed himself up, bracing against the rubble as he sprinted through the chaos, dodging the debris and the ongoing battle. Each step felt like a gamble, but he was fueled by the hope that there was still a way out. The figure stood at the edge of the battlefield, its presence a stark contrast to the violence around it. Vrax made his way through the chaos, desperate to reach it before it vanished. "Wait," he called out, his voice breaking through the din of battle. "I need your help." The figure turned its gaze toward him, and in that moment, Vrax felt a connection, a deep understanding that transcended words. The creature raised its arm, and for a brief moment, the chaos around him fell silent. The Guardians paused, their glowing forms waiting, as if they were responding to a command. "Tell them to stop," Vrax pleaded, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You can save them. You can save us all." The figure inclined its head slightly, as if considering his words. Then, with a gentle wave, it gestured toward the battlefield. In an instant, the Guardians retreated, their forms blending back into the earth. The soldiers stood in stunned silence, unsure of what had just transpired. Vrax watched, heart pounding, as the figure extended a hand toward him. "Come," it said, its voice echoing in his mind. "I will show you the truth." Without hesitation, Vrax took a step forward, leaving the chaos behind. He had witnessed the horrors of war, but this was different. This was a chance to understand, to learn what Earth truly was: a living entity, a force to be reckoned with. As he reached the figure, he felt the energy around him shift, a warmth enveloping him as if the very essence of the planet was welcoming him. It was both terrifying and exhilarating, a feeling he had never experienced before. Together, they moved away from the battlefield, and Vrax knew that the fate of the Empire and perhaps the entire galaxy would hinge on the revelations that lay ahead. As Vrax followed the figure away from the chaos, he felt the ground beneath him pulse with an energy that was both foreign and familiar. The air grew thicker, charged with a sense of purpose that drove him forward. He turned to glance back at the battlefield, now a tableau of confusion. Imperial soldiers were slowly regaining their composure, but the Guardians were no longer attacking. It was a moment of reprieve, but he knew it wouldn't last. The figure led him deeper into the remnants of an ancient forest, the trees towering like sentinels, their leaves shimmering in the soft light filtering through the canopy. Vrax felt an overwhelming sense of connection to the earth, an instinctive recognition that he was part of something much larger than himself. "Who are you?" he asked, panting slightly from the exertion. "What are the Guardians? Why are they protecting this planet?" The figure paused, turning its gaze toward him. Its features were obscured by the shadows, but Vrax could feel the weight of its presence, a calm assurance that promised understanding. "I am a sentinel of this world," it replied, its voice resonating within his mind rather than echoing in the air. "The Guardians are the embodiment of Earth's will. They exist to protect and preserve the balance of life here." Vrax absorbed the information, trying to wrap his mind around it. "Balance? But the Empire—" "The Empire disrupts that balance," the Sentinel interjected. "Your kind has a history of conflict, driven by ambition and desire for control. Earth has awakened to defend itself." He felt a chill at the words. "But we're not all like that. We didn't come here to conquer, at least, not my unit." The Sentinel regarded him with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "Intentions do not matter when actions result in devastation. The Guardians will respond to any threat against their home. The Empire is seen as a predator, and predators cannot be reasoned with." Vrax's heart sank. He had seen the Empire's brutality. He had been part of it, believing that strength equated to order. But now he realized that it was a cycle of destruction that would ultimately consume them all. "What can we do?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Is there a way to stop the Empire before it's too late?" The Sentinel nodded slowly. "You must help them understand. They need to see that Earth is not a resource to be exploited, but a living entity to be respected. If you wish to save your kind, you must find a way to bridge that divide." Vrax swallowed hard, the enormity of the task settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. How could he possibly convince an entire empire to change its ways? He was just one soldier, an outcast among the ranks. Yet, deep down, he felt a flicker of hope. If he could understand the Guardians, perhaps he could help the Empire understand too. "Where do we begin?" he asked, his resolve hardening. "What do I need to do?" "Return to your people," the Sentinel instructed, its voice steady. "Show them what you have seen. Share the truth of Earth, of its Guardians. Only then can you prevent the oncoming storm." The words hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. Vrax knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and skepticism, but he couldn't ignore the urgency of the situation. The Empire was relentless, and if he failed to act quickly, the consequences would be dire. "I'll do it," he said firmly. "I'll make them listen." "Time is of the essence," the Sentinel replied, extending a hand toward him. "I will guide you back, but the journey must be your own." With a nod, Vrax stepped forward, taking the Sentinel's hand. In an instant, the world around him shifted, colors swirling and merging until he was enveloped in a bright light. When he opened his eyes again, he was back at the edge of the battlefield, the sounds of chaos still echoing around him. Vrax took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He spotted Kellen and the remaining soldiers regrouping, their faces pale with disbelief. They had witnessed the Guardians, the destruction, and now they were left to pick up the pieces. "Vrax," Kellen called out, spotting him. "Where have you been? We thought you were lost." "I found something," Vrax said, urgency lacing his voice. "We need to leave this place. The Empire is on a path to destruction, and I have a way to stop it." Kellen's brow furrowed, skepticism clear in his eyes. "What are you talking about? We've faced worse than this before. We can fight back." Vrax shook his head, desperation clawing at him. "No, you don't understand. The Guardians are not our enemies. They are here to protect the planet, and if we push them further, they will unleash their full power. We have to show the Empire that Earth isn't just a target, it's alive." The tension in the air was palpable as the remaining soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. Vrax could see the seeds of doubt taking root in their minds. He needed to make them understand before the Empire's war machine crushed the Guardians and them along with it. "Look around you," he pleaded. "This isn't a simple skirmish. We've unleashed forces we can't control. We're not fighting a war, we're provoking a natural disaster." Kellen crossed his arms, clearly wrestling with his thoughts. "And what do you suggest we do? Retreat? Abandon the mission?" "We have to signal for a ceasefire," Vrax urged, his voice rising. "If we can communicate, if we can make them see reason, maybe we can avoid total annihilation." Kellen narrowed his eyes, measuring Vrax's resolve. "And if they refuse to listen? What then? We'll look weak in front of the Empire." "Or we'll be alive," Vrax shot back, frustration boiling over. "I'm not asking for weakness, I'm asking for wisdom. We can't keep fighting blindly. We're outmatched." The other soldiers began to murmur among themselves, their expressions shifting from doubt to contemplation. Vrax seized the moment, hoping to sway them further. "Please," he implored, "we can be the voice of reason. We have a chance to change the course of this conflict. We can show the Empire that we're not just warriors, we're capable of understanding, of growth." After a tense moment, Kellen sighed, the fight fading from his posture. "Fine. We'll try your way, but if this backfires, it's on you, Vrax." Relief washed over Vrax, but he knew this was only the first step. They had to act fast. "We need to find a way to establish communication with the Guardians," he said. "They might be willing to negotiate if we approach them correctly." With a decision made, the soldiers quickly regrouped, each man and woman sharing the weight of their collective uncertainty. Vrax felt a spark of hope flicker within him. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could make a difference. As they prepared to move, Vrax couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. The Empire wouldn't wait long, and if they initiated another assault, all hope for a peaceful resolution would be lost. The soldiers set up a temporary encampment at the edge of the battlefield, using what little technology they had to establish a rudimentary communications array. Vrax took a deep breath, focusing his thoughts on the Guardians, on the sentinel that had guided him. "Let's try to reach them," he said, his voice steady. "If we can just make contact, maybe we can find common ground." Hours passed, each minute stretching into an eternity. Vrax watched as the soldiers worked diligently, their hands moving with purpose, but he could see the anxiety in their eyes. The longer they waited, the more tense the atmosphere became. Finally, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in an eerie twilight, a signal crackled through the communications array. The screen flickered to life, revealing an image of a Guardian, its glowing form radiating an ethereal light. Vrax's heart raced. "This is Vrax," he said, taking a step forward. "We come in peace. We seek to understand and communicate." The Guardian regarded him with its piercing gaze, and for a moment silence enveloped them. Vrax could feel the weight of its presence, the gravity of the situation pressing down on him. He was not just speaking for himself, he was speaking for every soldier, for the very future of their species. "You wish to parley?" The Guardian's voice resonated, filling the air around them. Your kind has disrupted the balance. Why should we listen? Vrax took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. Because we understand now. We've seen the devastation, the pain caused by our actions. We are not here to conquer. We are here to coexist. We can learn from one another. The Guardian paused, considering his words. Vrax felt the tension in the air shift, a flicker of hope igniting within him. What assurances do you have? The Guardian asked, its voice steady. Your kind has always sought dominion over others. How can we trust that you will not repeat the cycle? Vrax met the Guardian's gaze, determination flooding through him. We will prove it. We will stand against the Empire together, as allies. But first, we must end this conflict before it escalates further. Silence stretched between them, and Vrax could feel his heart racing in the stillness. This was their chance, but it hinged on trust that they could break the cycle of violence and forge a new path. Very well, the Guardian finally said, its tone shifting. We will consider your proposal. But know this, if you betray the trust we place in you, the consequences will be dire. Vrax nodded, understanding the weight of the Guardian's words. We won't fail, I promise. With that, the communication ended, leaving Vrax standing in the dim light of the encampment, the reality of what lay ahead settling heavily on his shoulders. He turned to Kellen and the other soldiers, their expressions a mix of disbelief and cautious optimism. We have a chance, Vrax said, his voice steady. But we have to act quickly. We need to prepare for the Empire's response. Kellen clapped a hand on his shoulder, a small smile breaking through the tension. Let's make it count. As they began to strategize, Vrax felt a surge of determination. This was only the beginning, but he was ready to fight for a future that embraced both humanity and the Guardians of Earth. As dawn broke over the encampment, the first rays of sunlight cast long shadows across the battlefield, a stark reminder of the night's turmoil. Vrax gathered the soldiers around a makeshift table, crafted from salvaged equipment and crates. The atmosphere was charged with a mixture of anxiety and hope. Here's what we know, Vrax began, his voice firm. The Guardians are willing to listen, but we need to prepare for the Empire's reaction. We're not just facing their military might, we're also confronting an ingrained ideology that sees Earth as a resource, not a living entity. Kellen nodded, leaning closer. We need to demonstrate our commitment to this alliance. It won't be easy, especially with the higher command not likely to back us. Agreed, Vrax replied, running a hand through his hair. If we can gather more evidence of the Guardians' existence and their intent to protect Earth, we can convince the Empire that this isn't a war worth fighting. The soldiers exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from uncertainty to determination. Vrax felt a flicker of pride swell within him. They were no longer just soldiers, they were allies in a new cause. First, we need to establish a secure line of communication with the Guardians, Vrax continued. We'll send a small team to negotiate with them, while the rest of us prepare for any potential attacks from the Empire. I'll go, Kellen volunteered, his jaw set. I know the Guardians' territory, I can navigate it. Vrax hesitated, wanting to voice concerns but recognizing Kellen's resolve. If you're sure, I won't stop you. Just remember our goal is to seek understanding, not provoke further conflict. Understood, Kellen replied, meeting Vrax's gaze with a newfound respect. We can do this. As the soldiers began to strategize, Vrax felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. He had taken the first step, but now the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. With Kellen and his team heading out, Vrax turned his focus to the encampment's defenses. Hours passed as they fortified their position, scavenging materials to create makeshift barriers and reinforce their communications equipment. Vrax felt a sense of urgency. Time was slipping away. They needed to be ready for anything. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from the perimeter of the camp. Vrax spun around, instincts on high alert. A group of soldiers rushed toward him, their faces pale and wide-eyed. "Sir, we've detected a fleet approaching," one of the soldiers exclaimed, panic edging his voice. "It's the Empire." Vrax's heart dropped. "How many ships?" "Several dozen. They're coming in fast, likely responding to our last signal. We need to prepare for an attack. Gather everyone, set up defensive positions, and activate the communications array," Vrax shouted, adrenaline surging through him. "We'll need to contact Kellen and his team immediately. We can't let the Empire catch us off guard." As the soldiers scrambled to obey, Vrax took a moment to steady himself. He could feel the weight of the impending confrontation bearing down on him. The Empire would not back down easily, and they would likely see any sign of resistance as a direct threat. "Vrax," one of the soldiers called, interrupting his thoughts. "We've got a visual on the enemy fleet." Vrax rushed to the observation post, his pulse quickening as he peered through the scope. A formation of sleek, menacing ships sliced through the atmosphere, their metallic hulls glinting ominously in the light. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was it, the moment of truth. "Signal Kellen's team. We need to know where they are and if they're in danger," Vrax barked, his mind racing. They needed to buy time, to hold the Empire back long enough to establish their message to the Guardians. As he focused on the approaching fleet, the communications array suddenly crackled to life. A voice emerged, distorted but unmistakable. "Vrax, this is Kellen. We're en route to the Guardians' territory. We detected the fleet, but we're not in position to engage. What's your status?" "We're on high alert. The Empire is inbound, and we need you to find the Guardians and inform them of our intentions," Vrax replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "They need to know we're not their enemy. We're trying to reach a peaceful resolution." "Copy that. We'll make contact as soon as possible. Stay safe." Kellen's voice faded as the signal cut out. Vrax turned to the other soldiers, their expressions tense. "We have to hold the line. Prepare for impact." The fleet drew closer, and Vrax could see the ships deploying drones and smaller fighters. The Empire was ready to assert dominance, and he needed to keep his men focused. "Remember your training, stay sharp, and don't engage unless necessary. We need to protect our position," Vrax shouted, adrenaline surging through him. "We're fighting for something bigger than ourselves today." As the enemy ships began to descend, Vrax's heart raced. The battle was imminent, and he could feel the tension in the air. He steeled himself, determined to prove that humanity could rise above its past mistakes. Suddenly, the first wave of drones surged toward them, weapons primed and ready. Vrax shouted commands, directing the soldiers to take their positions behind the barricades they had hastily constructed. "Fire!" he commanded as the drones approached, their energy weapons glowing ominously. A hail of gunfire erupted from their defenses, and Vrax's heart raced as he watched the drones explode in bursts of light. It was a chaotic dance of destruction, and for every drone they took down, more surged forward, relentless in their assault. Vrax pushed forward, his rifle trained on the incoming attackers. "Keep firing. Don't let them breach our perimeter." The soldiers fought valiantly, adrenaline driving them to hold the line, but Vrax could see the tide of the battle shifting. The Empire had come in full force, and they were not backing down. "Vrax," a soldier shouted, pointing toward the sky. "They're deploying ground troops." Vrax glanced up, his heart sinking as he saw the Empire's forces descending from the ships and dropships. They landed with precision, soldiers pouring out, weapons raised and ready for combat. "Hold your positions," Vrax bellowed, rallying his men. "We will not let them take this ground." As the Empire's soldiers advanced, the sounds of battle became deafening. Vrax fought with everything he had, the weight of his responsibility driving him forward. Each time he took down an enemy soldier, he felt a pang of remorse. This wasn't just a battle against the Empire, it was a fight for the future of Earth. But in the midst of chaos, a flicker of hope emerged. Vrax remembered the Guardians' promise, the potential for understanding. If they could survive this confrontation, perhaps they could turn the tide and forge a new alliance. As the battle raged on, Vrax kept pushing forward, refusing to let despair take hold. He felt the weight of every soldier beside him, each one fighting for something greater than themselves. They were not just warriors, they were a testament to humanity's resilience. But the Empire was relentless. They began to overwhelm their defenses, pushing closer and closer. Vrax could see Kellen's team was still en route, but time was running out. They needed to establish communication with the Guardians before it was too late. "Prepare for a tactical retreat," Vrax shouted, the decision heavy on his heart. "We need to regroup and signal for help." Just as the command was given, a massive explosion erupted nearby, sending shockwaves through the ground. Vrax stumbled, barely regaining his footing as debris rained down around them. "Fall back," he shouted again, urgency lacing his voice. "We can't hold them here." As they began to retreat, Vrax caught sight of the enemy commander, a tall figure adorned in dark armor, exuding authority. The commander's gaze met Vrax's, a cold smile playing on his lips. It was a challenge, a declaration of war. But Vrax refused to back down. He turned to his soldiers, determination igniting within him. "We may be retreating, but this isn't the end. We will find a way to unite with the Guardians. We will show the Empire what humanity is truly capable of." With those words echoing in his mind, Vrax led the retreat, the battle still raging behind him, the fate of their mission hanging in the balance. They had faced the Empire, but the real fight was just beginning. The retreat was chaotic, but organized, a desperate maneuver to preserve their forces. Vrax led his soldiers through the maze of makeshift barriers and debris, their hearts pounding in unison with the sound of gunfire echoing behind them. Every step felt like a race against time, but he knew they had to get to safety. "Regroup at the south perimeter," Vrax shouted, his voice cutting through the din. "We need to establish a fallback position and prepare to signal for backup." As they navigated the wreckage, Vrax couldn't shake the feeling of dread settling in his stomach. The Empire had proven relentless. They wouldn't stop until they had crushed any sign of resistance. He glanced back, heart racing, but saw no sign of Kellen or his team. They had to be out there, pushing toward the Guardians. Reaching the south perimeter, Vrax found a momentary respite. The remaining soldiers gathered around him, catching their breath. The tension in the air was palpable. They all understood the gravity of their situation. "Report," Vrax commanded, his eyes scanning the group. "How many do we have left?" "5 of us made it back, sir," one soldier replied, panting heavily. The others were lost in the retreat. Vrax felt a pang of sorrow, but quickly suppressed it. "We can't dwell on the losses. We need to focus on what's next. We have to reach the Guardians and convince them to aid us." The soldiers nodded, determination replacing their fear. "What's the plan, sir?" Kellen's second in command, a young soldier named Mara, asked, her brow furrowed in concern. "We need to send a signal to Kellen's team," Vrax explained, glancing at the makeshift communication array they had cobbled together. "If we can reach them, they can bring the Guardians here to help us." "Understood," Mara said, moving to the equipment. "I'll try to establish a connection." As she worked, Vrax felt a moment of quiet desperation. He knew they were running out of time. The Empire would not allow them to regroup without a fight, and every moment spent waiting could be the difference between life and death. "We need to fortify our defenses," Vrax instructed the soldiers. "Prepare for another attack. If the Empire sees us vulnerable, they'll come for us." While the soldiers began to set up makeshift barricades, Vrax stayed close to Mara, watching her fingers fly across the controls. The static buzzed around them, an ever-present reminder of their isolation. Come on," she muttered, frustration creeping into her voice as the signal flickered in and out. "We need to connect." Just then, a loud explosion rocked the ground, shaking the encampment. Vrax instinctively dropped to a knee, adrenaline surging as he glanced toward the direction of the blast. The Empire was closer than he'd anticipated. "Status report," Vrax barked, trying to maintain order amid the rising chaos. "Still trying to establish a signal," Mara shouted back, determination etched on her face. But we're losing time. Vrax gritted his teeth, scanning the horizon. The Empire's forces were regrouping, their ships hovering ominously in the sky like vultures circling their prey. He could see troops advancing, and they would soon breach their defenses. We can't wait any longer, Vrax decided. We'll have to send a distress signal manually. It's risky, but it's our only option. Mara looked up, concern flickering in her eyes. And if they spot us? Then we fight, Vrax replied, his voice steady. We fight for our future. With a nod, Mara quickly wrote down the coordinates and instructions for the signal. If they receive it, they'll know to come prepared, but we have to move quickly. Vrax turned to the remaining soldiers, their faces set with resolve. We're about to take a big risk. I need everyone to be ready to hold the line while we send the signal. We're not giving up. The soldiers nodded, gripping their weapons tightly. Vrax felt a swell of pride. They were a team, united in their purpose, and they would not be broken. They moved toward the higher ground to get a clearer signal, carefully avoiding enemy lines as they made their way. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the stillness before the storm. As they reached a vantage point, Vrax positioned himself next to Mara, peering through the scope. "Ready?" he asked, trying to keep the fear from his voice. "Ready," Mara replied, determination etched on her face. Vrax took a deep breath and activated the signal device. The screen blinked to life, and they quickly input the coordinates and distress message. "This is Commander Vrax of Earth's Resistance," he transmitted. "We need immediate assistance. The Empire is advancing. I repeat, we are under siege." As he finished sending the message, a sudden explosion erupted nearby, shaking the ground beneath them. Vrax and Mara stumbled, scrambling for cover as the Empire's forces breached the perimeter. "Hold your positions," Vrax shouted, rallying the soldiers. They formed a line, weapons at the ready, hearts pounding as the enemy surged forward. "Here they come," one soldier yelled, panic creeping into his voice. Vrax took a deep breath, steeling himself. "We can do this. Remember what we're fighting for." The Empire's soldiers poured into the clearing, their weapons glowing menacingly. Vrax's heart raced as he aimed his rifle, firing into the advancing troops. The sound of gunfire mixed with shouts and the explosions of grenades, creating a cacophony of chaos. "Push them back," Vrax shouted, adrenaline fueling his every move. They fought with everything they had, the fight for survival igniting their spirits. But the Empire was relentless, their numbers overwhelming. Vrax could see their commander leading the charge, eyes locked on him. This was personal. They would stop at nothing to eliminate the threat. "Keep firing," Vrax urged his team, desperation clawing at him. They were outnumbered, but they had something the Empire didn't a reason to fight. As the battle raged, Vrax caught sight of a glimmer in the sky. It was a ship, approaching fast. Hope surged through him. "Kellen," he shouted, recognizing the craft as one of their own. Just as the Empire's forces seemed to gain the upper hand, the ship descended, unleashing a barrage of fire that decimated the enemy ranks. Vrax's heart raced as he watched his team gain renewed strength. "Now's our chance," he yelled, rallying the soldiers. "Push forward." With the Empire's attention diverted, they surged ahead, forcing their way through the chaos. Vrax could see Kellen and his team disembarking, weapons drawn and ready to fight. "Vrax," Kellen shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "We received your distress signal. We're here to help." "Thank the stars," Vrax replied, relief flooding his veins. "We need to hold this ground." With their combined forces, they pushed back against the Empire, the tide of battle beginning to turn. The soldiers fought with renewed vigor, driven by the knowledge that they were not alone. Vrax fought alongside Kellen, their camaraderie strengthening their resolve. They moved through the fray, taking down enemy soldiers and coordinating their efforts. Every victory felt like a step closer to the future they desired. But just as they seemed to gain the upper hand, the Empire's commander re-emerged, a sinister smile on his face. "You think you can resist us, human?" he taunted, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "You are nothing but a blip on the radar of our empire." Vrax locked eyes with the commander, anger boiling within him. "We are more than you'll ever understand," he shouted back, determination igniting his words. The commander sneered, raising his weapon. "Then let's end this." As they prepared for a final confrontation, Vrax felt the weight of his mission pressing down on him. This was their moment, a chance to stand against tyranny and fight for a future where humanity could thrive. With a fierce battle cry, Vrax charged forward, Kellen at his side, ready to face whatever the Empire had in store for them. They were fighting not just for Earth, but for the very essence of what it meant to be human. And in that moment, Vrax knew that they would not go quietly into the night. They would fight, and they would win. The battle reached a fever pitch, chaos erupting around Vrax as he charged toward the Empire's commander, his heart pounding in sync with the chaos that surrounded him. The air crackled with tension, energy weapons firing and explosions illuminating the night sky. "Vrax, watch out!" Kellen shouted, breaking Vrax from his tunnel vision just in time. He ducked as a barrage of laser fire whizzed overhead, and Kellen's sharp instincts saved him from a deadly strike. "Thanks," Vrax replied, adrenaline coursing through him. He steadied his rifle, taking aim at the enemy commander, who stood tall amid the fray, radiating confidence. The commander was a symbol of the Empire's oppressive might, and Vrax felt an intense desire to bring him down. "Let's finish this," Vrax shouted, rallying the nearby soldiers. They formed a tight line, weapons raised, pushing forward as one cohesive unit. With Kellen at his side, Vrax felt an unbreakable bond of trust and purpose. As they advanced, Vrax caught a glimpse of the enemy's strategy unfolding. The commander was orchestrating the Empire's forces with ruthless precision, trying to flank them. "We need to disrupt their formation," Vrax yelled, leading a charge toward the left flank. Kellen moved in tandem with Vrax, taking out enemies as they surged forward. The smell of scorched metal and burning debris filled the air, and the sounds of battle created a cacophony that threatened to overwhelm them. But Vrax focused on the task at hand, determined to bring the fight to the enemy. The commander noticed their maneuver and barked orders, directing his soldiers to converge on Vrax's position. "You're outnumbered, human. You cannot win," he shouted, a sneer twisting his lips. Vrax met his gaze, defiance surging through him. "You underestimate humanity," he shouted back, feeling the strength of his comrades beside him. They fought fiercely, exchanging fire with the Empire's soldiers as they pushed closer to the commander. Vrax could feel the tide of battle shifting. Their momentum was growing, bolstered by the presence of Kellen and the reinforcements. But just as they were about to close in on the commander, a sudden explosion erupted nearby, sending shockwaves through the ground. Vrax stumbled, momentarily disoriented, and glanced around to see the chaos intensifying. "Fall back," the commander bellowed, attempting to regroup his forces. Vrax seized the moment, charging forward with Kellen at his side. "Now," Vrax yelled, focusing on the commander, who was trying to escape. They had to capitalize on this opening. As they approached, the commander unleashed a powerful energy blast, narrowly missing Vrax, but hitting one of their soldiers behind him. The blast sent debris flying, and Vrax felt the rush of anger. They couldn't let this man escape. He represented everything they were fighting against. "Keep pushing," Vrax shouted, adrenaline propelling him forward. They had to end this confrontation now. As they reached the commander, he turned, fury etched on his face. "You think you can defeat the Empire?" he roared, raising his weapon once more. "Defeating tyranny is exactly what we intend to do," Vrax retorted, his voice resolute. With that, Vrax lunged, tackling the commander to the ground. The impact sent shockwaves through his body, but he gripped the commander tightly, determined not to let him escape. Kellen followed suit, joining the struggle as the commander fought back, throwing wild punches and trying to dislodge them. Vrax felt a surge of adrenaline, every fiber of his being focused on subduing the commander. As they wrestled, Vrax could feel the weight of his own fears lifting. This was not just a battle for survival, It was a fight for hope, for the future of humanity. The commander thrashed beneath them, and Vrax managed to secure one of his arms, pinning it down. "You will never control Earth," he shouted, the words fueled by the collective determination of everyone fighting for their home. Kellen seized the opportunity, pulling out a stun weapon and aiming it at the commander. "This is for every life you've destroyed," he declared, firing a shot that connected with the commander's chest. The Empire leader convulsed, eyes wide with shock before he slumped to the ground, incapacitated. A roar of victory erupted from the soldiers as they witnessed the fall of the commander. The tide of battle began to shift dramatically. The Empire's forces, seeing their leader down, faltered, uncertainty spreading through their ranks. "Now's our chance," Vrax shouted, rallying the remaining soldiers. "Let's push them back." With renewed vigor, they charged forward, taking advantage of the confusion among the enemy. Vrax felt a surge of hope. This could be the turning point they desperately needed. As they pressed forward, Vrax glanced back at the ship that had arrived with Kellen's team. It hovered protectively above them, weapons trained on the remaining Empire forces, ready to provide support if needed. "Regroup and push," Kellen commanded, leading a charge alongside Vrax. They fought with a fierce determination, every shot fired infused with the hope of a brighter future. But just when it seemed victory was within reach, the Empire's reinforcements arrived, swarming into the area like a wave crashing against the shore. The reinforcements were well equipped, and the atmosphere thickened with tension as both sides clashed in a violent display. "Stay strong," Vrax shouted, firing into the fray. "We can't let them overwhelm us." The battle raged on, and Vrax felt the exhaustion creeping in. Each step was harder than the last, but he pressed on, driven by the faces of the soldiers fighting beside him, the memories of those they had lost, and the hope for a future free from oppression. Just when it seemed they were at a breaking point, a sudden shift occurred. From the edges of the battlefield, a new force emerged: the Guardians. Their presence was imposing, and their sleek, bioluminescent ships hovered above, ready to assist. "Finally," Vrax exclaimed, hope flooding his veins once more. As the Guardians descended, they unleashed a barrage of energy blasts that lit up the battlefield. The Empire's forces reeled, caught off guard, and the soldiers rallied behind the Guardians, their spirits reignited. "Now we fight together," Vrax shouted, leading the charge alongside the Guardians. They surged forward, a united front against the Empire. Vrax could hardly believe the transformation happening around him. The Guardians fought with precision and power, their advanced technology outmatching the Empire's forces. As the battle unfolded, Vrax felt an overwhelming sense of unity, a bond forged in the fires of conflict. With every passing moment, the tide of battle shifted. The Empire's forces began to falter, and the defenders of Earth pushed forward, reclaiming their ground. Vrax felt a fire ignite within him, the thrill of victory surging through his veins. But just as they seemed to gain the upper hand, the commander, still alive but weakened, clutched a communication device in his hand, eyes narrowing with malice. "You may think you've won, but this is far from over," he spat, voice dripping with venom. Vrax felt a chill run down his spine, realizing the implications of the commander's words. "What do you mean?" he demanded, stepping forward. With a twisted smile, the commander pressed the device, sending a transmission that crackled through the airwaves. "You will regret this day, humans. The Empire will not forget this betrayal." In that moment, Vrax understood. This battle was merely the beginning. The Empire would return, and they would be stronger than before. But now, they had allies. The Guardians stood with them, ready to fight for Earth. "Let's finish this," Vrax shouted, rallying the soldiers once more. "For our future." As the Guardians and the defenders of Earth surged forward together, Vrax knew that while this battle might be won, the war was far from over. But they would face it together, and that unity would be their greatest strength. The battlefield crackled with energy, the remnants of the fierce conflict still swirling around Vrax as he took a moment to catch his breath. The Empire's forces were in retreat, their once mighty presence now dwindling under the united front of Earth's defenders and the Guardians. Vrax felt a surge of hope, but also an awareness of the challenges that lay ahead. As the smoke began to clear, Vrax turned to Kellen, whose expression was a mixture of triumph and concern. "We've won this battle, but that commander's words echo in my mind. We can't let our guard down." "Agreed," Kellen replied, scanning the horizon for signs of the retreating Empire. "We need to prepare for the next wave. This won't end here." The Guardians, with their luminous ships and advanced weaponry, hovered protectively over the area, their presence a beacon of reassurance. Vrax approached one of the Guardian leaders, a tall figure with an ethereal glow. "We appreciate your timely intervention, but we need to discuss our next steps." The Guardian nodded, a deep wisdom reflected in its eyes. "We will stand with you. The Empire has taken notice of your resilience. They will not take your victory lightly." Vrax felt the weight of those words. "What can we do to prepare? We can't allow them to catch us off guard again." "You must fortify your defenses and build alliances with others who oppose the Empire," the Guardian advised. "We can offer technology and strategic support, but the will to fight must come from you and your people." Kellen stepped forward. "We'll do whatever it takes. We need to unite our resources and prepare the populace for what's coming." As they strategized, Vrax couldn't shake the feeling of unease that clung to him. The Empire was formidable, and their resilience was a reflection of their ambition. If they were to safeguard Earth, they needed to be both clever and strong. Days turned into weeks as Vrax and Kellen led the charge to fortify Earth's defenses. They set up communication networks with the Guardians and reached out to other factions in the galaxy that had also suffered under the Empire's reign. Slowly, a coalition began to form, a tapestry of cultures and races united by a common purpose. During this time, Vrax found himself spending more moments reflecting on his past, especially the sacrifices made by those who had fallen. He visited the memorials erected for the soldiers lost in the fight, each name a reminder of why they needed to keep fighting. One evening, while standing before a monument, Vrax felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Kellen. "It's hard to believe how far we've come," he said quietly, "but there's still a long road ahead." "Yeah," Vrax replied, eyes fixed on the names etched into the stone. "I can't forget those we lost. We owe it to them to ensure their sacrifices weren't in vain." "Together, we'll ensure that," Kellen said, determination shining in his eyes. "But we need a plan for when the Empire strikes back." The following days were filled with strategy meetings, simulations, and training exercises. Vrax felt the camaraderie among their troops strengthen, a sense of unity born from shared experiences. They were readying themselves for a fight that was inevitable. Then, the moment they had anticipated arrived. An emergency alert blared through the communications network, and the atmosphere shifted from hopeful preparation to urgent action. "Commander Vrax," a soldier called out, panting from the run. "The Empire's fleet is on approach. They're launching a full-scale invasion." "Gather the troops," Vrax shouted, adrenaline surging through him. "We need to establish defensive positions immediately." As the soldiers scrambled into action, Vrax's mind raced with thoughts of strategy. They had fortified their defenses, but the Empire would come at them with everything they had. The Guardians would assist, but it was up to Earth's forces to hold the line. Kellen joined Vrax, eyes sharp with determination. "What's our plan?" "Hold the perimeter. We need to use the terrain to our advantage," Vrax instructed, pointing to the surrounding hills. "We'll set up barricades and use the Guardians' firepower to cover our flanks." As the troops prepared, Vrax felt the weight of leadership pressing on him. This was their moment to prove their resilience, to show that they would not bow to tyranny. The skies darkened as the Empire's ships descended, filling the air with a low hum of power. Vrax stood at the forefront, ready to face the enemy head-on. As the first wave of Imperial soldiers disembarked, Vrax shouted, "For Earth! For those we've lost!" The soldiers roared in response, a unified battle cry echoing across the field. Vrax led the charge, rifle raised, determination fueling every step. They would stand their ground, no matter the cost. As the Empire advanced, the clash began. Energy blasts lit up the battlefield, explosions rattled the ground, and soldiers fought with unwavering resolve. Vrax pushed through the chaos, his focus razor-sharp, every instinct honed for survival. The Guardians moved alongside them, their ships raining down fire upon the advancing enemy. Vrax coordinated with Kellen, directing soldiers where they were needed most, ensuring they covered each other's backs. But the Empire's forces were relentless. Vrax could see their commander from the previous battle, now leading the charge with a ferocity that matched their own. "Vrax," Kellen shouted, pointing. "The commander is pushing forward." Vrax nodded, heart racing. "We need to take him down again. He's a symbol of their aggression." They charged toward the commander, but the Empire's forces swarmed them, trying to cut them off. Vrax and Kellen fought with everything they had, determined to reach their enemy. Finally, they broke through, standing face to face with the commander once more. "You think you can defeat us?" he snarled, eyes ablaze with hatred. "You will fall just like the rest." "Not today," Vrax shouted back, rallying his strength. "We've fought too hard to let you win." With that, the confrontation began anew, the two leaders grappling in a fierce struggle for dominance. Vrax felt the weight of his purpose drive him forward. This was not just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the future. In the heat of the battle, Vrax's thoughts turned to his comrades, the lives they had built together, and the sacrifices made for this very moment. With a surge of adrenaline, he pushed the commander back, gaining the upper hand. Just as victory seemed within reach, the Empire's reinforcements began to swarm in from all directions. "We need backup," Kellen yelled, desperately trying to fend off the advancing troops. "Hold the line," Vrax commanded, determination coursing through him. "We can't let them break through." But the weight of their situation pressed down heavily. The Empire was regrouping, and their forces were overwhelming. Vrax felt the exhaustion creep in, but he refused to give in. "Keep fighting," Vrax roared, rallying those around him. "We are humanity. We do not surrender." In that moment, a blinding light erupted from above. The Guardians had joined the fray. Their ships unleashed a barrage of firepower that illuminated the battlefield, driving back the Empire's forces. The tide began to turn, and with the Guardians' support, Vrax felt hope swell within him. They fought as one, the energy of their combined efforts pushing back against the Empire. As the battle raged on, Vrax saw a glimmer of possibility. The Empire's forces began to falter, uncertainty spreading among their ranks. "Now's our chance," Vrax shouted, leading the charge forward. They pushed deeper into the fray, determined to drive the Empire back once and for all. With renewed strength, they pressed on, reclaiming ground and dismantling the enemy's morale. Vrax felt the fire of determination burning bright, knowing that this was their moment, a culmination of every fight they had faced. And then, as the dust began to settle, Vrax stood atop a hill overlooking the battlefield, breathless and battered. The Empire's forces were in full retreat, and the remaining soldiers cheered in triumph. "Vrax, we did it!" Kellen exclaimed, clasping Vrax's shoulder. "Not just us," Vrax replied, taking in the sight of the united forces standing strong. "This victory belongs to everyone who fought. We showed them that humanity will not be conquered." As the dust settled and the echoes of battle faded, Vrax knew that while this fight had been won, the war was not over. They had forged a powerful alliance, and the Empire would surely return. But for now, they had triumphed, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. With the Guardians by their side and a coalition of free beings standing strong, Vrax felt an unwavering resolve within him. They would not just survive, they would thrive, and together they would protect Earth from any threat that dared to challenge their freedom. The light of a new dawn broke over the horizon, and Vrax took a deep breath, knowing that the fight for humanity's future was far from over. But with hope in their hearts, they were ready for whatever came next. The Galactic Council chamber was vast, a place where power once thrummed with certainty. Now, it felt hollow, its occupants silent, their faces heavy with the weight of recent events. High Chancellor Varen, who had long led the council with an iron will, sat at the head of the chamber, staring blankly at the holographic map of Earth that shimmered before him. The Empire's failed invasion of Earth was not just a military defeat, it was an unprecedented humiliation. Varen could scarcely believe it. A small, unremarkable planet, from a previously insignificant part of the galaxy, had not only repelled the Empire, but had humiliated them in such a public fashion. And worse still, the humans had warned them. They had told the Galactic Council, the Empire, and anyone else who would listen, stay away from Earth. The Council members, a collection of the galaxy's most powerful species, had dismissed the warnings. Earth was too primitive, too backward to pose a threat. How could such a species, still using physical ammunition and primitive space travel, be a challenge to the vast, technologically advanced forces of the Empire? The Council had been wrong, catastrophically wrong. High Chancellor, a voice broke through the silence. It was Kriox of the Thrans, an elder statesman of the Council, his wrinkled features reflecting both age and wisdom. It is time we face the truth. We miscalculated. Gravely. Varen remained silent, his eyes still fixed on the hologram of Earth. It shimmered with a subtle menace now, the blue planet a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. We underestimated them, Kriox continued, and now the entire galaxy knows. The Empire is in retreat, their reputation shattered. The humans' allies, the Guardians, have emboldened others. Factions we thought were docile are now talking of rebellion. The balance of power is shifting, because of Earth. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Other council members shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another. They had all been so sure of the Empire's victory. They had endorsed the invasion, believing it would be swift and decisive. Instead, it had galvanized humanity and revealed them to be far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Humanity has always been an enigma, Kriox said, pacing slowly before the council. Their resilience, their capacity for innovation under pressure. We have never encountered a species quite like them. They thrive in adversity. When pushed, they don't break, they adapt. Varen finally spoke, his voice low and measured. You believe the Council is to blame? Kriox hesitated. We gave our consent to the invasion. We assumed the humans would fall, just as countless others have. But now we must face the consequences. Earth is not just another backwater planet. It is a force to be reckoned with. Another council member, Trellin of the Merithians, chimed in. They possess a kind of unpredictability. Their strategies, how could they have outwitted the Empire's best military minds? How could a planet with such basic technology bring the most advanced fleet to its knees? Varen shook his head slowly. Because we do not understand them. We cannot. They think differently. Their minds are not bound by the same logic that governs most advanced species. They are chaotic, unpredictable, and in that chaos they find strength. Kriox nodded in agreement. The humans warned us, and we ignored them. We must now decide how we proceed. Do we continue to view them as a threat, or do we take a different approach? Varen's eyes flicked to the other council members, gauging their reactions. Some were still processing the magnitude of the defeat. Others, like Kriox, were already thinking ahead, considering what this new reality meant for the Galactic Council. We must tread carefully, Varen said finally. The Empire's power is waning, but they will seek revenge. Humanity may have won this battle, but the war is far from over. And yet, we cannot afford to make the same mistake again. The room grew quiet as Varen stood, his posture stiff with the weight of leadership. We must send an envoy. We must understand them. We must learn why humanity, of all species, defied us and what they plan to do next. A murmur of surprise rippled through the chamber. Sending an envoy to Earth was a risky proposition. Would the humans even welcome them, after what had happened, or would they see this as another sign of aggression? Varen's gaze hardened. If we do not learn from this, if we do not adapt as they do, we are doomed. The galaxy is watching, and if the Council wishes to maintain its influence, we must evolve. We must forge a new path with Earth." Lorax nodded in agreement, though there was an air of caution in his eyes. "We cannot afford another misstep. The Empire's pride blinded them. Let it not blind us as well." Varen took a deep breath, his voice resolute. "Let it be known, then, the Galactic Council acknowledges the power of humanity. We underestimated them. We failed to heed their warning, but we will not make that mistake again." The Council members exchanged glances, some nodding, others still unsure. But the truth was clear. Earth had risen in power, and the Galactic Council, for all its wisdom and might, had been forced to learn a humbling lesson. Humanity was not to be underestimated. As the Council session adjourned, Varen remained seated for a moment longer, staring at the hologram of Earth. A quiet sense of unease gnawed at him. He had once thought that the galaxy's destiny was in the hands of the Council, but now he wasn't so sure. Humanity, he muttered to himself, a force of chaos and survival. And for the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council understood that some lessons came at a price too high to ignore. The Galactic Council had learned its lesson. Earth was not a world to be conquered. It was a world to be reckoned with,